Welcome to the March 1st planning meeting of the Pine-Richland School Board. Please join me in the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance
to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Roll call, Ms. Williams.
Mr. Lyons?
Here.
Mrs. Misbach?
Here.
Mr. Kashani?
Here.
Dr. Campbell? Here. Mr. DiTullio?
Here.
Dr. McGarrett?
Here.
Dr. Meyer? Mr.
Here.
Mr. Moy?
Here.
Mrs. Swope?
Here.
Thank you.
Do we want to adjust that at all, Mr. Krabinsky? Take a pause.
It was Barb's mic.
Yeah, I think we're okay.
Okay.
Left.
Mrs. Williams, is your mic on?
It is. It's back on, I think.
If you
Yes,
could,
we can turn it on.
yeah.
Thank you very much.
We're okay now, Mr. Karpinski. I think that's the one that's causing the challenge.
Is this meeting being streamed and available, right? So hopefully our company outside, I would call their attention to the COVID-19 educational model update.
Correct.
What we'd like to do, as we have been doing, is give an update to the community prior to our recognition of visitors. So, Dr. Miller.
Thank you. Mr. Stobener, if you could pull up the PowerPoint, please. Okay, good evening. We're glad to have approximately 80 people logged on to the live stream. Tonight's update will be sent as a podcast tomorrow to all of our students, staff, and families. And we use this approach to ensure a consistent, accurate communication. It is so easy for rumors to emerge during challenging times. And by recording the updates over the past year, we're able to create an archive of the information. Tonight's comprehensive update is also designed to answer some of those frequently asked questions that we hear in the community. So the agenda is noted here. The first item is COVID-19, community and culture, but I would also like to point to the second to last item, which talks about a transition plan to increase in-person attendance in grades 4 through 12. So this will serve as the agenda for tonight. It is truly a privilege and responsibility to serve as the superintendent of Pine-Richland during challenging times. And I can say to the board and to our community and staff, there is not a day that goes by in my 8 years at Pine-Richland that I do not put myself in the seat of others within this community, within the school, and within the district. It's the nature of my position to have the responsibility to think about all of those different perspectives. It has been almost 13 months since our first communication around, at that time, the novel coronavirus, and 12 months since our initial shift in educational model. We have learned, the world has learned so much about COVID-19 during that time. Early on, and it continues to this day, the three key drivers have served as our foundation, our grounding for how we think, and that is trying to find that balance between health and safety, learning effectiveness, which includes not only academic, but social, emotional, mental health, all of the areas of learning, and flexibility. COVID-19 has challenged everyone, but that impact has been felt differently by different people, different families, as they work to continue to find success. We've also known that one size doesn't fit all. And at Pine-Richland, at each developmental level, we've had different options and choices for families. But at every level and really within every family, we know that there is not just one solution, that one solution is not a perfect one. And so we appreciate the manner in which all families have continued to work together with us to find success. We still receive the question from time to time, how are we making decisions or recommendations? And so we've talked about this iterative decision-making process, but it's important to, again, review it. It starts with the Public Health Agency Foundation. So we see the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, PA Department of Health, PDE, Allegheny County Health Department. That is the foundation. And those agencies have continued to learn, develop, refine thinking over the last 12 months, over the last 6 months, over the last 3 months. And so the guidance and information provided by them is a critical foundation. We know that we have some people who do not support recommendations from those agencies. And as we have conversation with our families and communities, we know sometimes we're not going to find common ground in those discussions because at a foundational level, we do not find agreement in what serves to ground decision making. I want to make so clear the fact that since the start of this school year, we have had some form of in-person learning happening at Pine-Richland. For some reason, there seems to be a misunderstanding about that. We have had in-person learning at every level of our district since the start of the year. At kindergarten through 3, we've had a 5-day-a-week option in person because as a district, we added 14 additional staff members in order to emphasize the early literacy, early numeracy, foundational learning of our youngest students and still be able to physically distance those students in our classrooms. Even in December and January, the first part of January, when we were closed and we were in a full virtual model for most students or buildings, we still had in-person learning 5 days a week for students in our life skills support programs at the secondary level. We have had some form of in-person learning happening all year. We have had athletic teams functioning, working, playing, performing all year. We have had extracurricular activities happening all year. We have the high school musical today practicing, working in small groups, finding ways to be engaged in the area of passion despite some of the challenges and restrictions. Marching band. So again, there's a misconception, some form of inaccurate communication happening by some that would make it seem as if we have not had those models in place. So again, important to be clear. The Healthcare Leadership Council, which I'll talk about on the next slide, is a really representative set of stakeholders that bring incredible expertise to our community. These are unbelievable professionals. These are experts in their field, willing to give of their time, energy, and talents in order to help ensure our understanding is where it should be. And then we go about doing, right? We plan, we implement, we learn, we revise our plan, we re-implement, we relearn. So there's a misconception that even when we're in the hybrid model for a period of time, that we're not learning, refining, growing, and considering other ways of meeting success for students. That's our full continuum of services. That's our full multi-tier system of support. That is everything we do, we are doing regardless of where we sit on the educational continuum. This is our Healthcare Leadership Council membership. The area I'd like to focus is on the bottom right of this slide. These are the 12 individuals who make up our public health and medical experts. In addition to their varied expertise, many of them, just like the board, most of the board actively have children within our schools. These experts also, many of them, have children in our schools at multiple levels. Some of them have students who graduated from Pine-Richland in years past. All of them have a vested interest in the Pine-Richland School District and in the Township of Pine and in Richland Township. We are fortunate to have their engagement. And they bring their diverse perspectives. As we'll hear later tonight, we have differences of professional opinion amongst this group, which we would expect to see because we are working through a challenging, unprecedented pandemic, and the understandings change over time. These next two slides are a repeat, but they're a commitment of value that is worth sharing. The first is that we listen. We are always listening. We are listening to feedback from students, parents, from community members. We listen to feedback from our key partners. We solicit that feedback in formal and informal ways. We hold listening sessions and focus groups and two-way communication with parents, with students. We ask them questions to understand their perspective. We do not operate in isolation of those who participate in our programs. We actively engage, discuss, listen, discern, and understand as we think about recommendations from an administrative perspective. People are tired. It's been a long time. Fatigue exists in so many different areas. And as I mentioned before, while some are thriving, some aren't thriving. And that has a lot to do with family and the circumstances around each family and what that model looks like and how it fits with children. But again, that's a part of this. Just continuing to find the energy to collaborate, to work together, and to sustain those three key drivers. And as I mentioned before, one size doesn't fit all. The last thing I would say here, and this is really important and difficult to understand, is we have a heck of a lot of families. And I don't mean ones and twos, I mean hundreds and thousands that in any model that we've done in the last 12 months, they're just finding ways to make it work. So we know they're silent, we don't always hear something from them, but they are making it work in their household. They respect the challenge of balancing those three key drivers, and they just go about supporting our schools, our teachers, and we really appreciate them as a group, and I wanted to mention that specifically tonight. Learning effectiveness, I mentioned before. There is a daily monitoring that's going on, but the one area for students who are not thriving is we ask that there's communication at the point of making the difference. And so usually that's with the people closest to the situation. If it's on a team, it's with a coach. If it's in a classroom, it's with a teacher. If it's in multiple classrooms, it's with a counselor or the principal. But when we engage the right people closest to the matter, there's usually not a time that we can't figure out a way to make things better. So if somebody knows of a child who's struggling or someone has a concern about a student, we want to know that information, we want it to be reported to the right people, and we want to engage and try to find ways to be more successful. From its inception, this is a dynamic model. We made one change this month, this update, and that's to make the continuum look like the CDC's thresholds for community transmission. To be able to very visually see that this has been a dynamic model, more restrictive on the right and less restrictive as we move to the left. In December and early January, we were in a full virtual model with the exception of life skills support at the secondary level because the conditions and cases warranted a more restrictive program. Prior to that and following that, we moved back into our hybrid. And our hybrid is an effective and dynamic model. Effective and dynamic doesn't mean it works the same for everybody, but it's an effective in its design in meeting the critical needs of educational programming during COVID-19. So how do I define that? Pine-Richland has had zero closures due to cases. We moved to full virtual instruction when conditions warranted, but we've had zero closures due to cases. We have been able to quarantine, and I'll talk about that in a couple other slides, in a very narrow and refined way. Only those who needed to be quarantined because of the nature of our model. And that does not get headlines. There's a lot of things that gets headlines, but one of the things that does not get headlines is effective hybrid in place, no quarantining necessary. That headline has never been written because it's not exciting. But I can tell you from a continuity of learning perspective, having no closures and having a model that allows continuity to happen really makes a difference. We hear a lot about other places. What about them? What about them? What about them? What about that district? And every district has its own set of considerations and culture, their own organizational profile. But for example, our hybrid model is 2-3-2-3 every other day. There are some districts by design whose hybrid in-person model was a Thursday, Friday, or a Monday, Tuesday, with one day of full virtual every single week. We pick up a day of in-person instruction every 2 weeks just by the nature of 2 and 3 and 2 and 3 in the every other day model. There's trade-offs. I remember Dr. Campbell asking the question, did we consider doing this for childcare purposes? And we answered that question in August about trying to balance the advantages and disadvantages of any model. So again, important to understand where this sits, and we've been moving the conditions and cases, that is, we've been moving in a direction to the left in a very good way. That's positive. You know, we're seeing, the community is seeing, better numbers. And that's really good because it provides us with different opportunities to have conversation about when and where and how can we potentially shift left on this continuum. So again, this is an important thing, and we are just now at the place to be discussing it. We share this every week. It tells the story of where have we been and where are we going. This is really good. What it doesn't tell us is how our understanding has changed, how the scientific community's understanding has changed, how what's happening in our schools has changed. We've learned so much, and the whole field has learned so much, that even though we're at a higher level on the 225 on the right than we were at 10.8 on the left, we know a lot more today than we did then. A lot more about our schools, a lot more about our design, and the experts know a lot more about COVID-19. So here we have what is a part of our weekly e-blast. We still have some confusion about this. We still have questions. So I'm going to start with the row at the top quickly. This is the incidence rate, one of the key measures that any of the agencies will talk about in terms of understanding COVID. What's exciting about this is that when we look at the column that says January 8th, and we look right, we can see a pretty steady decline in incidence rate. That is very favorable, very beneficial. What has changed from 6 weeks ago and even 3 weeks ago is a continuous decline in the incidence rate. And we see in the second row a similar decline in the PCR positivity. What that's telling the experts, and then what we understand, and this is critical for schools, is that the amount of virus out there is reducing. And because it's reducing, that affords us different understandings and different opportunities for the educational model. This is our key driver of health and safety. This is the first key driver. Second key driver, learning effectiveness. That's why we're talking about this. Just as a comparison point, because I read questions like, I was with you until November, I don't understand the full virtual in December. Well, look at the bottom left. I put a comparison peak there. On December 11th, the incidence rate was 420 and the PCR positivity was 14.6. And what we've learned is that the virus is in the community, the virus is in the schools. The schools does not drive the community doesn't necessarily drive the schools, but we live together in the same space, and so we would expect to see similar things happening in the community and in the schools. The other mitigation strategies are dark green. Dark green meaning they're as good as they can be right now. We have outstanding mask usage happening in our schools. Outstanding. Outstanding doesn't mean it's 100% perfect by 100% of the people 100% of the time, because that's not practically reality. But it's really good. And if we continue to strive for consistent and correct use of masks, it is just an incredible impact on then how we make other decisions about our educational program. The second one that's outlined in red is around physical distancing. And that's really the key premise. As we think about increased in-person instruction, the way to do that in a practical, feasible way is by reducing the physical distancing between students. And so what does that mean? With the gold standard having been set at 6 feet, Less than 6 feet doesn't mean the transmission's going to happen, but it is different than what has been outlined as the gold standard. And all the other areas, again, we have excellent things happening in our schools. The CDC a couple of weeks, maybe 3 weeks ago now, changed some of their coding. The point of this is to say, guidelines, not magic numbers. On the one indicator, our community is in that substantial orange. In the other, it's right on the edge of moderate low. So taken together, they represent. So that's why we're here, because this is really the first time over this reduction of the conditions that we're at a better place to be able to talk about increasing in-person learning based on all of our layered approaches to mitigation. Now, with that said, CDC is not a requirement at Pine-Richland School District. Pine-Richland School District operates within the PA Department of Health and the Pennsylvania Department of Education. So it doesn't mean that we do all one or all another, but if we think back to that image of our iterative decision-making process, all of those agencies taken together helps inform us the best in conjunction with our leadership council. This merely reflects that our healthcare capacity in Pittsburgh is improving as well, meaning we have the resources and the people to be able to manage what's going on. So second big thing, we talked conditions already, now let's talk cases. So you can see cases per month, and we just finished February, so we'll start a March to date, but you can see, just like the community, Allegheny County, we see a similar kind of pattern to the number of cases that are emerging. And we have a low, relatively low, number of cases. Now, low is a relative term. If we'd have had 35 cases in October, that was a whole different time period because that would have been startling. But now as we've worked through the pandemic and we better understand what's happening, we understand how we contact trace, we understand what that means, we're better equipped to be able, not just Pine-Richland, Allegheny County Health Department and others to be able to navigate this. But the column of 35, 27, and 8, I want you to remember that column as we talk a little bit about some of our illustrations of a classroom in a few minutes. Again, we mentioned this. We have a responsibility to consider building closure. There have been districts around us that have closed many, many times. Buildings that have gone from in-person, some form of in-person, to full virtual due to short-term building closure many, many times. And that's disruptive. So the benefits you get from one, you then take away in the continuity of learning. The difference this month, you can see that at the high school there's 2, middle school 1, Eden Hall 1. So those are low numbers. Those are active cases within a rolling 14-day window, and those are good, in fact, in a sense that they're very low. On the right-hand column, though, what's new this month is we have a range of the high school, middle school, and Eden Hall. Before, it was just the top number. And the reason it was the top number is because we were operating within the hybrid. The hybrid is built to maximize all mitigation, including physical distancing. As we consider a reduction in physical distancing to increase in-person learning opportunities, we also have to be more conservative with the number of cases that may trigger a closure based upon the model that we have. So there's risk and there are considerations in each of these. Again, another CDC table, but this talks about the point. So CDC would say we should not be competing in athletics. We have been successfully competing in athletics throughout this year. We have extracurricular activities going on. The reason for that was a balanced discussion, an open discussion with the board and with the administrative team in understanding what are the learning effectiveness outcomes, physical, mental, emotional, etc., through offering opportunity to compete. What are the risks of that, and how do we balance that? What this says is, again, we have one indicator, the orange star, that's incidence rate. The other is the positivity, and we're right on that edge. We're right on that balancing point with direction heading left, which is the reason that we're having all these conversations. First time this showed up was in October. It's showing up again. And one of the questions we had is, hey, Pine-Richland, haven't you been planning? Yes. And our plans have been based on the conditions and cases that are happening. It was premature prior to this time that we've now seen 6 weeks of improving conditions, 6 weeks of declining cases. Now is the time to engage in the conversation and think about what a phased, deliberate, well-managed, and well-executed shift left would look like on that continuum. So we're asking parents to, we will be asking tomorrow morning, parents in grades 4 through 12 to complete a selection for each and every child they have. That selection can be different for different children within the same home, but we're asking parents to complete that selection between tomorrow morning and Friday at noon. Have we asked parents questions before? Yes, that's a frequently asked question. But what we haven't done is we have not set a false expectation by asking parents a question about model before a potential shift was realistic. So it is not by accident we are here now. It is by careful and deliberate monitoring of what's going on, and we are now at the place to ask those questions. But if I was a parent and my school district was asking me to make a selection, and my district was asking me to make choices, I would want to understand what are the risks, what are the things I need to know about that choice in order to make the decision that was best. We are now at a place in our understanding in March 1, different than in October 5, to be able to provide that. So we're going to send that out and ask them to make a selection. Twice bolded on this slide is about continue to monitor conditions cases. That's never going to stop. So the continuum is dynamic. Just when we went to full virtual in December, except for life skill support, we were immediately asking the question, when can we move to hybrid? We're in hybrid, we're asking the question, can we move further left on the continuum? But the idea is, if something changes, we have to understand that and be able to respond to it. We've got a whole lot of logistics and scheduling I'll mention in a future slide to consider. This is not like just, hey, let's do it and do something. It does not work that way. It certainly doesn't work that way effectively. It is about understanding, preparing, and then taking deliberate action. So we're proposing, and we'll see a phased transition, first for students in grades 4 through 6. And that's based on their younger age and based on some of what has really been a body of literature around younger students, and a class of 21 for obvious reasons of our seniors. And then a second phase to the transition for grades 7 through 11. So in the beginning of tomorrow's survey, and this will be in our student information system, again, we explain to parents what we're talking about, and there are 3 key considerations that we want to bring to their attention in a clear, transparent way. Many school districts do not provide this kind of clarity around how and why, what parents need to consider. So number 1, we want to reduce, if they were to choose in-person instruction, it means a reduction in physical distancing, less than 6 feet. And less than 6 feet will become important to understand because of the implications it has on quarantine. Second is, again, increased risk of large-scale quarantine. And third is increased risk of short-term building closure. So again, we want parents to understand if I say I want more in-person instruction, I have to understand my child's going to be closer than 6 feet with other children as a design model, which means they may be quarantined at some point. We quarantine healthy people. Doesn't mean transmission per se. It just means quarantine of a healthy person for 14 days. And the potential exists for a short-term building closure. There's 2 other pieces on this slide that are important. The first is sustaining 6 feet for teachers. So teachers are different age category, different risks, and so ensuring that we maintain 6 feet of physical distancing for our teachers is important, and obviously eating. So we are already using alternate eating locations. We will need to expand the use of alternative locations in order to ensure that when students are unmasked and eating, they have at least 6 feet of physical distancing. We created this little illustration to clearly describe, what's happening. So if this were a classroom right now, with 6 feet of physical distancing between desks. So that's 6 feet on center. So the center of the desk is where the face is of the student, 6 feet to the left, another desk, face of the student. That's how that's designed. If a teacher has their teacher zone. Again, every classroom is shaped a little bit different, but the concept is the same. If a student, shown here in the red rectangle, if a student were to be positive, we were to learn that a student was confirmed positive with COVID-19. And this has happened well over 100 times. I mean, this happens. This is what we do. Based on our design model in the hybrid, no one in that class needs to be quarantined. So the student who's represented by the red rectangle would go home, they'd be in isolation, they'd be with their family, but no one else in the learning environment has to be quarantined for 14 days. The teacher does not have to be quarantined. And what we've seen, and if the teacher were the person who were the red rectangle, none of the students would need to be quarantined. And so, again, we've now lived this all year long, and we understand that transmission has not been happening in our classrooms, and that is because of the structure of the model. What we're talking about in terms of transition left on the continuum is this slide. So in this slide, we've increased the number of students, increased the number of desks. Now, those desks and students are located less than 6 feet apart. That's important because less than 6 feet, masked or unmasked, but masked because that's our model, means being defined as a close contact. So in this same example, if the student in red were to be confirmed positive, the students in yellow would be quarantined for 14 days. Okay, again, that does not mean that we believe transmission would occur if they're following all the mitigation. It could, but it doesn't mean that. It means they would be quarantined for 14 days and learning virtual during that period of time. So if this were a Eden Hall classroom where there's more cohorting, podding, less fluid movement between courses and schedules, then we would have this impact. If the same student were at a grade 10 and they're in 7 different classes, depending on the location of their desks or the specific details of that classroom, then it could be much more than 7. It could be 49. It could be 30. It could be a different number, but a number greater than just one set. At our most recent Healthcare Council, Leadership Council meeting, and we've had 13 of them, we have another one scheduled, as we talked about transition left on the continuum, from our healthcare experts, we got some feedback. The first is that none of our experts felt that our phased recommendation was too slow. None of them felt it was too slow. About half of them felt that based on all the other layered mitigation, this is the right time to be acting in a deliberate way to look at increasing in-person instruction. And about half of them expressed anxiety and concern about reducing the physical distancing less than that 6 feet. The feedback was the hybrid is working well. We've not had closures. We've not had quarantine. And again, that's where they were. And that's really to be expected. That's pretty much dialogue that's happening in the community. But a lot of other things came up. Again, the layered approach of other mitigation factors. So we've talked about those. We do so many things for mitigation that all have a combined sort of collective impact. The staying at home when students feel ill. So if a student wakes up and even has mild symptoms, staying home is a huge decision, but it makes a big difference because it prevents the potential risk. We've had a whole lot of cases this year where we've not had someone active in our schools when positive because they've been listening to other people even in their family and making decisions to stay at home until they found out for sure. Again, on that meeting, some staff expressed concern about the teacher zone. And again, we understand that. We appreciate that. At the same time, we're valuing that physical distancing for our staff in this model. And we now have 6-7 months of experience to know that when that is in place, we're not seeing any transmission to staff. In fact, what we've learned, not just at Pine-Richland, but in general in the county and in elsewhere, the biggest risk to staff is other staff, when they might congregate or come together or let their guard down a bit or go to a lunchroom or do something like that in terms of any transmission. Ventilation came up as a conversation. As weather turns better, we have better ability to lower windows and do all the other things to increase fresh air that's moving within the building. Travel came up. Vaccinations came up. Again, there's a whole lot of other things that were discussed on that meeting, but it's important to know how our experts weighed in. So the selection survey will go out tomorrow. We'll ask for parents to respond by the 5th. For all of those grade levels, they have the choice of full virtual, alternating day, the hybrid, if you will, full alternating day in person and alternate day virtual, or 5-day in person. So again, families can make a different decision for different children depending on the needs of the child and whatever it is that's happening. Next week, so after that data is in, next week we need to really understand what it means. So we're asking parents to select that model. Then we need to look at all of those numbers to understand specifically what it means for classroom setup, number of students in a room, make sure the cafeteria is managed. Again, seating charts for contact tracing. So to use that illustration, on day one, we have to have those seating charts ready and available so that if that red desk example were a case, we immediately understand who else would need to quarantine as a result of that, and we can take that action efficiently with Allegheny County Health Department. Again, cafeteria, locker rooms, there's a lot of other parts. We're also working with transportation to understand exactly how many students ride on an A to K day and on an L to Z day. If we combine A to K and L to Z and we have greater ridership, we want to understand what that distancing looks like on the bus. And again, we have other mitigation in place on the bus as well, with windows being down even in colder temperatures, with masking, and so forth. Again, these are included here. They're in our weekly e-blast, but there's all sorts of mitigation. We just don't want to lose sight of that. The things that we also heard from our Healthcare Leadership Council experts. Again, symptom checking on a daily basis. It's so easy to just fall into a routine and not pay attention as much. But we need everybody to continue to pay attention to, their personal physical health, taking the temperature, all of that. The most common, and I mentioned this last month, the most common area that we hear from families is, he had thought we had a mild cold, and they didn't recognize that as potentially being COVID. That's the most common thing we hear from people, because those are what some of the symptoms look like and feel like to individuals of different ages. Mask wearing, again, we have to be disciplined. So we're doing an excellent job, but we really have to make sure, as we consider reducing the physical distance, how the mask is worn over the nose and fitting the face, the mask meeting the design criteria. Again, really important to not only protecting the wearer, but to protecting others as well. And again, it's a shared ownership. There have been questions and there have been some comments, some of which are derogatory, but comments about what's happening in the community. And again, we work together. So our success is our success. Our success in school is our community success. Our community success is what we do in school. Like, it all works together. And so we want to continue to work together to try to make good choices there, because again, all of that sort of comes back together. So what we're recommending at this point is, if things continue to trend the way that they're trending, we do the survey this week. We analyze the numbers and prepare each of the buildings next week, in the beginning of the following week. Eden Hall and seniors begin every day on March 18th. That's a Thursday. They go Thursday, Friday, and the whole next week. Then we go to spring break. That gives us an opportunity to focus in on those grade levels, to manage that, we believe, effectively. And then we go to spring break. When we return, it's a couple days later, we bring everybody else back. If we were able to do that, we would have 2 months basically left of the school year to be able to manage that transition. And again, the survey data, the selection data, will help us to better understand the specific details. We review all that information around our March 15th time together here, and then either move forward or determine if something else is needed. But again, that's the phased transition plan. And lastly, I just wanted to end with this. It is a continuum. Our hope is continuity and stability. We hope to keep driving left on this, and we have to be ready if we need to adjust, just like we have adjusted earlier this year. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Miller. Any comments or questions from the board?
Yeah, I'll start. So the first thing I'll say is that we've gotten a lot of emails. One of the, I won't say it's consistent, but one of the things that I keep seeing that, and I'll start off by saying, I disagree with the recommendation because I do think it's too slow. However, in some of the emails that we've gotten, one of the things that's been stated is that we don't know what's going on because there's no communication. I don't know how you could have been involved in the school district and not gotten communications. I mean, it's out there, there's a lot of it. Disagreeing with the recommendation versus saying you didn't have communications are two totally different things. I happen to disagree with the recommendations, but I've certainly gotten the communications as a board member and as a parent. And one of the things that I've seen is that, again, whether you agree or disagree with the recommendations, to say that anyone in the administration or the school board doesn't care about the kids. Most of us, not all, but most of us have kids either in this district or neighboring districts and are all going through the same kind of things. We all want our kids in school. We happen to have a disagreement of how that continuum is. But we've been communicated as to what Pine-Richland's continuum is. As a community, I think it's a bigger problem, but when we make a decision, again, and I won't support waiting, but when we make a decision as a board, as a school, we make it and move on. That's part of our decide model. That's what we do. We don't have to agree with the decision. There's dissents, and that's fine. But to say that you haven't been informed, you're just not paying attention. So having said that, I disagree because I disagree with the definitions of risks and the definitions of safety. And that's where I was back in October, back in August. I disagreed with what the definition of safety was, and I still don't have a clear plan in my head of what the definition of safety for some is. To me, safety is you take the risks in your head and you mitigate them. And you decide, I'm going to put my kid on the school bus today, and I know there's risks involved. I'm going to get myself in a car today, and I'm going to deal with the risks involved. To me personally, when we're talking about school-age students, I believe that's the level of risk we're talking about here. For them to get the virus, for them to be sick, although not pleasant, doesn't come with a huge amount of risk from everything that I see. Why do I disagree with the experts? Because let's be honest, the experts have not been spot on. 50 weeks ago, 50, we got a recommendation from the foremost healthcare expert in the United States, and he said 2 weeks. That's what they said, and we're sitting here 50 weeks later. The same individual said, don't wear masks, do not wear masks. Then masks have become a mandate. So there's reasons why I'm skeptical of what some of the healthcare experts say. for those reasons, I sit here now and we're being told internally 2 weeks. I think 2 weeks is too long to wait. Why do I think it's too long to wait? What's going to happen if we follow this model is another third of the school year for the students will be gone. Another third of what's left of the school year. We're going to be into April before our high school students are back. Our model should be centered around giving the data, which I believe our data is out there. I don't think that's deniable. But our model should also be giving the parents the choices, period. They're their kids. We are going above and beyond, in my opinion, to protect our teachers and keep them in a 6-foot zone. The parents can make that decision whether they feel that it's safe for their students to be closer than 6 feet. The parents that aren't comfortable with that are still going to have a model. They're still going to have an option to have their children learn. But we need to give the option to for all days a week. There's nothing in my mind that's going to change in 2 weeks that's going to alter my opinion in 2 weeks that we're going to come back here and I'm going to say no. Whether the numbers go up or down in Allegheny County, it's not going to affect my decision to recommend moving forward. And one of the best statements that I got from an elderly individual this week, and it was interesting because if I was elderly, I would probably have a different aspect of how I'm thinking of things. But this individual said to me, she said, "Greg, I'm not going to die before I'm dead." And it struck me because here's a person that is high risk, that has not stopped living. I think some of us have gotten to the point where we have become paralyzed by the fear, and I talked about that earlier this year. I don't understand it. It's my opinion. And I want to make a motion that we vote to move this recommendation up 2 weeks.
Thank you, Greg. Anyone else have a comment?
So I did want to say that I do not have children currently in the district. I have three sons who graduated from the district. But I am invested in this district. I've done lots of volunteering. And I currently, besides serving on the board, I also am an independent volunteer, and I volunteered to come into the schools and help out where needed. And I did actually do that on Friday. It was a great experience. The staff was very helpful. The students were extremely helpful, learning to use some of the technology, and very polite, and helped with taking attendance, and the teacher was on the monitor. And I felt very comfortable. The density, I was at the high school, and the density was very comfortable. The students, it was a great experience. So, I'm helping in many different ways, trying to make sure that where there's a gap, that there's still continuity of learning. So I may not, have children here, but I do, give back. So another point, Greg, that you made was that the children don't get the virus, or if they get it, it may be their mild symptoms, or they may be sick. But statistics are showing they're not dying from it. They're older people who die from it. But the virus lives on the body. That's how it thrives, and that's how it spreads, and it continues to either increase or decrease if we don't allow it to have a host to live on. And I do value all people's lives, and I think that our students are important, their mental health and wellness. I think that we all have a responsibility to look out for that, and we do that here in the district. And I feel that our families also have that responsibility as well, of course, to take care of their children and to help with their resilience by a positive attitude and helping out and working together. We work together as a school community. within the district, within this building, or these buildings, and also within the community. It all goes together. And another point, at waiting, part of the waiting is to be polite, respectful to the administration. Part of that is getting the information to work on, to plan for seating charts, for contact tracing, because not everybody is comfortable with returning into a close atmosphere. They want to know, what is it going to look like? We need to be able to do the contact tracing and set up the seating charts. That all takes time. It doesn't happen by saying that tomorrow we can start, or even in a week. It's not that simple. So we need to be able to have time for planning and preparing, and so that's part of we're happening. Doing the phased-in approach, see how it goes. There's also a variant out there. Numbers are stable right now. They've come down. They're not coming down as quickly any longer, and hopefully we do get a handle on this variant of the virus itself, and that it doesn't cause any increase or any change, so that we don't end up having to not be able to get our kids back in school. So I think doing a planned approach that we prepare properly for, instead of just all of a sudden opening the school doors and allowing everyone to come in, it's not wise, in my opinion. I think that this approach, I don't think is slow. It's phased, it's planned, it's specific, it's detailed, or it will be detailed. There's a process.
One of the things I would mention, again, just as a misconception, not to argue, not at all, but to, and I rarely speak to other districts. Every district around us has a different model. And it's easy to hear people pick at something here and something there, and I like that, and not understand how all that works. So I mentioned earlier, we're 2-3-2-3-2 kids in the hybrid. Other districts, many of them, have been 2 days a week. There's a neighboring district of which I'm very familiar, so I can speak with 100% confidence, that has a phase-in plan in March for increased in-person learning. And it looks like this: 4-2-4-2. That's the month-long phase-in. We're 3-2-3-2, just as a course of our regular model. What's proposed here, as an example, just looking at the seniors in the class of 21, is they get a week of 2 and a week of 3, depending on which one, a week of 4, and then a week of 5. So when we talk about the speed of phase-in, again, it's understand, but at the same time, it's pursuit of what? There's a lot of districts that are going in-person learning for 4 days a week, but not the 5th day. And again, so everybody's a little different. And what we have designed is something to be able to deliberately move through that and be effective and successful with the goal of sustaining that and maintaining continuity. So again, I respect the points that you made, but I also want to be, because we get these misconceptions. We get people that are sharing things that are factually inaccurate about what another model looks like. When people talk about getting kids back in school, there are school districts in this region and in this country where students have not spent a second of in-person learning in the last 12 months. There's a lot of energy about getting kids back in school when they haven't spent a second in an in-person environment during that time. That's not what we're talking about here. And I don't want to confuse other broader issues with the actual experience of what's happening within our schools. So again, not everybody's thriving, and a heck of a lot of families are making a heck of a lot of sacrifices to make things work. But the quality of what we're doing, even in the hybrid, and the quality of what we believe is the next step of discussion is pretty significant. And it's not like what is happening in many places. Again, I'm not comparing us to many places to make I don't want to get into a false argument there, because it's about what are we doing for our community, but we don't want to misunderstand what we're doing as well.
Peter, I just want
Dr. Miller, yeah.
I would just like to thank Dr. Miller because I don't know that he gets us enough publicly, for his very thoughtful, caring approach to communicating why we do what we do. And Greg, you couldn't have said it better, that we could disagree on maybe the recommendation and move path forward, but I don't know how anyone could be upset with the level of communication, transparency, thoughtfulness, love, frankly, that we've demonstrated from day one. And the professional way that we've gone about this is something I'm very proud of. So thank you, Dr. Miller, and to your team as well.
Thanks, sir. Dr. Malik.
Yeah, I would just like to weigh in here a little bit and say that I don't think that this body or this administration has made any decisions based on fear. I think fear is far from where we've been operating here. And I think that this administration and this body have been making decisions from a point of knowledge and the latest available, well-vetted, credible knowledge that goes beyond just personal perceptions of this morning when I'm going to put my child on the bus, am I comfortable with that level of risk? It's a lot more than that when you're dealing with public health issues, and you have to think about things as geometric spread of disease and the potential harm to people at scale that can happen very quickly. And so this approach of this body has been very deliberate, very well vetted, and very well thought through. And I think it's important to put that forward. And I know that every one of us cares about every student in this district because we have children in the district and also because we care through the work that we do. We're volunteers that are here, and we do it because we care about the people who are here. So I think this measured approach makes a great deal of sense, and it allows us to continue to vet things, and it's not based on fear. So I think that I want to thank the administration for this update and look forward to more discussion.
Thank you, Matt.
I mean, just one thing, just again, so you're aware, it's not that we're waiting either. We need the data to be sure, but, right now what we're actively doing is we're looking again back at every classroom space to understand, what are our options. So right now we're at 6 foot. We're thinking about a 4.5 foot, a 3 foot, so we want to know that. And that's some of that takes the time and to understand it. If you've been in our schools, so you know, every area has a little different design, and we've got to think about that. We've got to be ready for that. So we need the time to understand that. And then once the data comes in to see, which families are interested in more time at school, then we can quickly apply it. And then when the kids actually come back, it's a smoother transition into their day, coming into a place that we're ready for them. And if we have to shift the classroom to a larger space, it's there, it's ready, we've organized, we've got schedules, we've got a lot to think about it and prepare to do that. So, one of the questions that we posed to the Healthcare Leadership Council last time was too fast, too slow, or just right. We didn't hear any too slow. We heard all either too fast or just right. So again, taking that guidance that we've been consistent with throughout this whole process, applying that, and then trying to be as well prepared as we can for when the kids do come back. That'll make for a much, we believe, more enjoyable experience for our kids, because they're coming, this is something new for them too, coming back into this, and that takes a period of adjustment as well. So we just want to be well prepared.
Thank you, Dr. Pressman. Any other thoughts? I do have a few thoughts to share with the board. And the community to a certain extent. We're here now knowing that it's the right time to plan to move back to increased opportunities in the classroom without social distancing in the future. If we had thought, this isn't delaying, we're not delaying saying we need time for buses and desks. If we had felt in consultation with our Healthcare Leadership Council that March 1st was the right day to return to school, that planning, the parent survey, would have taken place 3 to 4 weeks ago. I'm comfortable supporting this plan, partly because it is future focused. It's going to give us a few more weeks of data to check in, to ensure that the trend line remains positive. And there's a reason I do feel it should be that positive, not just where it is now, but even better. And it really goes back to, I think, perhaps some of the hesitancy of members of the Healthcare Leadership Council. Greg, we spoke about choice, and we want to give parents the maximum choice they can. But we have to recognize, and it was unfortunate for all the communications, how little respect was given for the parents who choose and may be deprived of the choice to attend some in-person learning at an appropriate social distance. So you have this recommendation from the CDC that's a requirement in the substantial transmission zone, and we won't split hairs because we're clearly migrating, out of that. But when we were squarely in the substantial transmission zone, to deprive parents the choice to any in-person instruction while meeting CDC requirements just seemed like not the right thing to do. We could provide that through hybrid, recognizing that it does mean that we weren't 5 days a week. As we migrate toward, depending on your definition, but as we migrate toward, I'll say moderate with a small m, so I'm not endorsing a specific metric as we haven't either, it's appropriate and that will constrain family choice, but I feel much more comfortable constraining that choice at this time. So our planning is not delays or lack of foresight. It's, I think that's really recognized by so many families. Kasha and I had a nice time. We took a walk around Grandview and other parts of Richland this weekend. Enjoyed, 2 hours of Saturday that were warm enough. And just the families that we met, their support, their understanding, their recognition of the details, the detailed planning, thoughtfulness for the kids that's going on was really heartwarming. So that was a tremendous opportunity to hear that. And Greg, I have to, I'm going to give you an E for elevate for what you said at the top of your comments. We can disagree on timing, we can disagree on timing with the community as well, but we have to recognize the planning that's gone in, the caring and the thoughtfulness. So I really, really appreciate that comment of yours. Thank you.
I just want to make sure I'm clear that I do not have a second for my motion.
To be clear, Greg, you made a motion. It was not seconded. There is, I will mention at this point in time, though, that this is our planning meeting, and for those not here, but within the sound of my voice, the way we work for items, we follow cycle meetings. A planning meeting has very few action items on it. It's where we discuss agenda for the voting meeting, which takes place, in this case, later in March, so in 2 weeks from this date. At that time, we do expect to have a revised health and safety plan for education, which should include many of the details that we've been talking about here in the planning for board approval at that time. Otherwise, we've been operating from a position of consensus, talking about these ideas. This is no different than what we've been doing all along for those who've been following it, with immense support from our families and community. We'll now move to item 1.03, recognition of visitors. I would encourage people to limit their comments to 3 minutes. Identify yourself by name and where you live in our community. And as I think most people understand by now, this isn't necessarily a two-way dialogue. This isn't the best forum for it. If you have specific questions that haven't been addressed in the presentation or otherwise, a member of the administration will reach back out to you to get in touch with you. But it is appropriate to let us know your opinion this evening.
We do have 5 people who would like to speak to the board. Our first speaker is John Corey. So Mr. Stover will call him now.
Mm-hmm. Mr. Corey?
Yes.
Hi, it's Pete Lyons. You're on with the board.
My name is John Corey. I live at 306 Northwind Court. I'm a resident of Pine-Richland for 20 years. I addressed the board before the last meeting. Dr. Pasquinelli called me after the meeting. We had a nice talk, and said I asked the district to look at the COVID plan again, and he said that they were not going to. I told him that I thought PR's plan was extremely conservative and was not in the best interest of the students. Since the last board meeting, I did some research. Other schools that are the same size as us in Western Pennsylvania have chosen a different path than PR. McKeesport has been in school every day since the start of school. I called and spoke to the superintendent's secretary. She acknowledged that he went out on a limb in the beginning, but in her words, he was right. She also said the students and families there love him because he puts students first. West Allegheny just celebrated 110 days in a row of in-school. Kiski area and Plum have both been in person 4 days a week since the very beginning of school. NA just announced they're going back. Mars put on a musical in person with people in the audience. Hempfield also allowed their band to play at football games. Dr. Miller mentioned how often he meets with other districts and superintendents. He must know others are having success on a different road than Pine-Richland is. This does not even talk about all the private schools that have been in person from day one of this school year. Last school board meeting was the first time I had heard the word mental health mentioned in any of the meetings. Given Pine-Richland's history of suicide, this board and administration should talk about this every single meeting. I wanted to know if the Healthcare Advisory Committee was talking about it, but oddly enough, they don't take notes and I wasn't given access to their recommendations. It seems like the only reason mental health was mentioned was because PR was in the news. This district seems to be a lot more concerned about how they look than doing what is right for the students. I recently learned that the yearbook has been rejecting pictures of students that aren't wearing masks. I don't understand what that could possibly be positive for the students. I mentioned this the last time I spoke to you. Good leaders adjust. This board and administration seem very focused on this diversity push. So you are pushing for what you want and not listening to what parents and students want. For those of you that did not read the senior survey, 67% of the seniors have no faith in this administration. I'm here speaking tonight because my family has experience with mental health challenges. One of our children has been in counseling at the Staunton Clinic in Wexford for a while. It is one of the largest mental health clinics in North Pittsburgh. We recently referred friends to this clinic. One of their children referred friends to this clinic for one of their children, and sadly they are not taking any new patients. The system is overrun with kids in need. Schools are not the only answer to good mental health, but they play their part. What I learned from helping our child is that routine and structure is a huge positive building block, and school can help with that routine and structure and the socialization that all kids need. Not to mention, they're better learning in person. In summary, other districts and other states have chosen a different path for the betterment of students. I saw a reply by Mr. Lyons that he recently mentioned doing what is right for the community. I mentioned the last meeting when I spoke to you that is not your job. Your job is to do what's best for these kids. The last part of what I was going to say to you tonight was going to ask you to take a vote. Mr. DiTullio had already asked for it and it was not seconded. For those of you who did not read the senior survey, 78% of the students who responded to the senior survey said they're having mental health concerns. I'll say that again, 78% of the students who responded to the senior survey are having mental health concerns. I understand all the stuff that you said tonight, but you're not taking into account the mental health toll. Other districts around us are taking that into account and they're choosing in a completely different path than we are. And I don't understand why we are not looking harder and understanding more of the needs of the children of this school. I've submitted questions in writing. I look forward to your response. Thank you for letting me speak tonight.
Thank you, Mr. Corey. And just to clarify, because we have a lot of people listening to understand, was there a formal senior survey commissioned by the school? Because using that term repeatedly, I think, is conveying that impression.
No.
Okay, this is the internet. This is presumably the internet poll that's being referred to. I just want to clarify that for people at home. Thank you.
I would just also add, and the board members know it, you've been on the board for a period of time. Mental health is a topic and focus of importance in this district. It has been continuously. The board docs would have all of the records and minutes that exist relative to mental health. It is an area of critical importance, not just at Pine-Richland, but at Pine-Richland. and we have taken significant action there. And so I would encourage anybody who wants to know more to know more. Dr. Paxton's on the Healthcare Leadership Council. She is the lead psychologist and one of the foremost experts in the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania. She weighs in to what it is that we are doing. Again, so just a couple of things there. The Healthcare Leadership Council is not minutes, but on our COVID-19 website, we put all of the presentations, which are the slide decks that lead to conversation amongst the Healthcare Leadership Council. In our cadence of meetings, we have Healthcare Leadership Council meetings usually the week before a board meeting. So most of the slide content at those meetings is repeated in our educational model updates we give for the community. And I also summarize key findings from the Healthcare Leadership Council on the public record as a part of my comments in the next meeting. Mrs. Misbach represents the board and can certainly attest to an accurate, clear, and clinical summary of what's discussed in those meetings is then shared by me to the community as a part of this meeting.
Thank you, Dr. Miller. Ms. Williams, we have someone else on the line?
We do. We have Mr. Chris Argenis.
Good evening, this is Pete Lyons. You're on with the school board.
Hi, my name is Chris Ard. I am a Pine-Richland. I live at 457 Cloverdale Drive.
Go ahead. Do we still have you there?
Hello, can you hear me?
We can hear you.
Okay. Did you hear anything I said prior to this?
No, just your name and address.
Okay. So I'd like to start by thanking the school board for taking the time to listen to the input of people they chose to represent and to mention that I'm a senior at Pine-Richland. I think it ought to be important for the school board to hear from someone that is directly affected by your decisions. I've seen firsthand the effects of virtual learning and the hybrid model. I've also seen the mental toll shutting down extracurriculars and sports has taken on myself and my peers. I understand a decision has to be data-driven. It has to have scientific backing in order for it to be considered. But I also think that personal experiences, and especially ones that are common amongst all students, should be taken into account. When I walked through the lunchroom at the beginning of the year, I saw countless people sitting by themselves or at the end of a table. They no longer come to school. Maybe this is due to them not feeling safe, which is a valid feeling, but I would venture to guess for a lot of people, it was probably because they were dreading coming to school because they had no one to talk to. Online learning has turned into anything but learning. At least one time, every day in every class, I see a teacher calling on a virtual student and that student not answering. I also observe teachers asking for students to put their cameras on and only for 3 people in the entire class to do so. This is no part on the students. They are set up to fail. It is clear to me that virtual learning isn't working. When I walk through the halls, there is no energy. Everyone's head is down. Coming from someone with depression, isolation is the last thing someone struggling with mental health needs. The inability to communicate in person with friends is the last thing someone struggling with addiction needs. A lot of times, you find that students that are struggling with mental health don't tell anyone. Students need to be comfortable with doing so. A lot of times, school is a safe haven for students with a troubled home life. Taking it away or making it easier for them not to go is creating a problem far more detrimental than COVID-19. Focusing on the big 3 and not mental health is bogus. I've seen zero effective action from the school board to improve mental health. I understand the risk in going back to full 5-day in-person learning. There is inherent risk in most things. Driving to school is statistically dangerous. It doesn't mean we should all start walking to school. I think it is clear that this past year has affected the students of Pine-Richland in drastic ways. I think the biggest question with the return to 5-day in-person learning is, do you value the physical safety of a student over the mental stability? I personally think they're one and the same. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Next, we have Mr. Brian Foote.
Mr. Foote, this is Pete Lyons. You're on with the board.
Hi, this is Brian Foote. I live in the Grandview neighborhood of Richland Township. So I think just wanted to start by thanking the school board for the clarity of the model that has been provided and the level of communications that has been provided. So I certainly have not felt that I've been not informed as to what's going on as we go along. So thank you for that. There's been a lot of talk tonight about models and options. And I think just one of the things that I wanted to share is that as we provide new options to people, it does come at a cost. There is, the option to provide increased in-person learning, does impact ultimately those that have been looking to provide an environment or take advantage of an environment that does comply with the CDC recommendations. So, and I think all of these points have been well discussed tonight, and I appreciate the perspective that's been provided. But I did just want to share that our perspective as a family is that ultimately we would look for an option that allows people to move to a 5-day-a-week option, but allow them to, to make their own choice in terms of kind of the risks involved, and not impact those families that are looking to have an in-person option for education that still maintains social distancing. And so as you get the survey results in, we would ask you to really look quite hard to see if there are options and configurations within the classroom that allow still for a hybrid option that allow people to maintain appropriate distance, while allow others that perhaps choose to do a 5-day option to be perhaps within the shorter than the 6 feet recommendation. So with that, I'll turn it back, and thank you very much for your time.
Thank you, Mr. Foote.
Our next person will be Joe Casario.
Good evening, this is Pete Lyons, you're on with the board.
Hi, this is Judy Masucci. I live on Trillium Court, and I'm a 19-year Pine Township resident. Thank you for letting me talk to everyone tonight. I wanted to first thank the school board for doing everything that you've done since this pandemic started. I'm sure when you were elected to this position, this was not what you signed up for, and I can't even imagine how hard it's been for you. So I appreciate everything that you've done, and I really feel that you've done a great job of keeping our kids safe. As we move to considering 5-day options, I know there are a lot of people who really want to go to be in school 5 days, and I completely understand that. But I would like to request that there be some sort of a preliminary survey done to allow parents who want to choose a hybrid option that is safe, like the last caller talked about, where we can maintain 6 feet distancing and we can maintain the CDC guidelines, so that we know in choosing a hybrid option whether or not we'll be able to maintain that safe distancing. So for me as a parent to choose a hybrid option for my son, I would like to know if 20% of people are going to choose a 5-day option, or if 70% of people are going to choose a 5-day option, because that presents a very different scenario for what the in-person classroom is going to look like for a hybrid student. And because the way the survey is being sent out, it's a final choice that doesn't give us the option to make an informed choice. So if we're not planning on choosing a 5-day option, we would like to know what the scenario will look like for our students. So I really feel that people who are choosing a 5-day option are choosing it regardless of how many other people choose 5-day. Whereas people who would like a hybrid option, their choice may differ if 20% of the students choose 5-day versus if 70% of the students choose 5-day. And in order to be able to make that informed decision, I really feel that there needs to be a preliminary survey so that all parents can make an informed decision. And so that we can have a better idea of what the in-person classroom is going to look like based on how many people choose a 5-day option. So again, I appreciate everything that you've done. I really just want to be able to make an informed decision And I can't make an informed decision without knowing how many people are going to be going 5 day.
Thank you, Ms. Masucci.
Excuse me. Can I have a comment about that? I know that we're not supposed.
Let's go right to the
Yeah, I
next
just wanna
caller.
ask about
I do
the
feel a little
message.
bit like a disc jockey here tonight. Next caller?
Go ahead.
Good evening, this is Pete Lyons, you're on with the board.
Hi, this is Brian Foote again. Apparently, I think you were trying to reach somebody else.
Thank you, Mr. Pope, for understanding. We'll try to reach the next caller. Good evening, this is Pete Lyons, you're on with the board.
Hi, my name's Joseph Casario. I live at 334 McIntosh Drive. I'd first like to say that a great American author once said that he'd rather be ruled by the first 400 names in the Boston phone book than the faculty at Harvard. And after sitting through and listening and living through what the PR board is doing to this community, I know exactly what he means. Because I'd rather be ruled by the first 8 names, it doesn't include Mr. DiTullio, in the PR directory than this school board. This has really gotten to the point where I'm almost speechless, but somehow I'll get some words together to express how I feel and how I think the silent majority, if I've heard that a few times today, feels. There's a study out of Wisconsin that shows that there's almost zero transmission in schools. The WHO has said that 3 feet is a distance that is adequate. That's the World Health Organization, not the Allegheny County Health Department or the PR board, the World Health Organization. Are you smarter than them? Do you know something we don't know? Please tell me. I really want to know at this point. I want to know what you know that the WHO, the American Academy of Pediatrics, pretty big voice in children's health and well-being, and our good friends, the CDC, say that our children should be back in school. So I really want to know. I want to know what you know that they don't. I want to know what you know that makes it so that when Mr. DiTullio asks, hey, let's do something really unique and different in America, let's vote. And maybe let's vote with the blinds up, but let's vote. Let's have a vote. Let's have a discussion. That's how we used to do things in America. We would discuss them. Sometimes you win, sometimes you lose, but we all moved on because we realized that that's how you do things. So for the members of the board that won't even stand with Mr. DiTullio and say, you know what, I'm not going to kowtow to, I've been on a few boards in my day, and I know that there's always, usually one, sometimes two, but usually one member of the board, and it's usually the president in this case, I would assume Mr. Lyons, that's running the ship, calling the shots. Maybe there's some people on the board that say, I don't know, maybe I do, maybe I don't want to vote, but I don't want to make Mr. Lyons mad. Let's just get along because it's going to be easier that way. Because then we can speak for the silent majority. Do you know who the silent majority is? The silent majority are the people that you threatened us through our children. Hey, listen, you want to have a football season? Don't you dare go sit on that hillside in the open air, many feet apart. Don't you do it. You do that, you take this opportunity to watch your child play a sport that he loves, and we're going to cancel the whole game. Yeah, I wonder why people might be silent with that kind of threatening attitude. But don't kid yourself, they're not silent. You're going to hear from us. You're going to hear from us in the elections. You're going to hear from us in primaries. Mr. Miller, you said that the differences in learning are from family dynamics. Really? Really? So has Pine-Richland now become?
Excuse me, that's been 3 minutes. If you could tie it up in 10 seconds, thank you, and then disconnect the
I
line,
would ask
Mr.
you,
Stoviner.
Mr. Lyons, Mr. Miller, and the board, minus Mr. DiTullio, to resign your positions right now. Resign. Move forward. You're exhausted with this pandemic.
Well, I'm not even going to thank you for that one. You guys afraid of me?
I forgot to mention during the opening presentation, we will share the results of the survey, so that we'll make that publicly available. We'll mention it to the families. We do understand how number of people selecting something could impact other people. I mean, that's the nature of what we're talking about here. What I can say is we need people to make their best selection, given the information we have. But then, as we have done all year, there are case-by-case circumstances that arise that we try to make good decisions. We haven't locked people in selections. We have worked to try to figure things out if we can during the course of the year. And so that's something that again, we think about as we go into the models.
Kasha, did you?
Yeah, I just want a quick comment about the survey options, because this was the question that was the most commonly asked to me. Because I understand that we kind of like making the choices that we are asked to commit to the end of the year, and we don't know how many people will choose what options. I understand that there's no other way. We need information to plan. They need information from us. I understand this, but if the hybrid option is an option, the people need to have a clarity that those people who will choose hybrid, they will be mixed in within the smaller physical distance with the people who choose 5 options. There will not be like a separate group for hybrid. I just think it's fair to say this out loud, that people will, the only benefit for choosing hybrid is to limiting the days of exposure, not limiting the exposure itself. So I think that people need to have this clarity, and the way we've been discussing so far, there's a need for clarification, that I'm only limiting the days that my child will be more exposed to it, and it's fine, like, you know, we can live with that, but it seems like they need to be clarity.
Yeah, so if we have a classroom teacher, let's say Mrs. Jones, and Mrs. Jones has 24 students on her roster, and right now 12 of them are A to K and 12 of them are L to Z every other day, and so there's 12 students physically in the classroom. If 18 of those 24 chose the 5-day-a-week option, and the remaining 6 chose alternate day, there would be 21 each day. 18 that are in the 5-day, 3 on one day, 3 on another day. So that is a good point, and that's something that we can make clear. The other thing that was discussed that I didn't remember to mention tonight is at the 4 to 6 level, the full virtual option right now is through PRVA. So it's a dedicated teacher teaching pure full virtual students in that situation. If a full virtual student in grades 4 through 6 selected either of the in-person options, it would be a teacher change. We believe that if a student is in the alternate day hybrid in grades 4 through 6 and determines they want to go full virtual, they'll be able to maintain their current teacher, and they will remote into the classroom to the same teacher using the same technologies every day. So, and this is no different than it has been really all year. If someone leaves the PRVA and comes into the in-person alternate day program, it's a teacher change. The other direction, they'll keep their teacher.
And this will be, that's a lot, and there's certain caveats there, and that'll be clarified as we're putting those questions out there. I think those 2 points that you made.
Yeah, the second.
Selecting.
Yes, second point is in there. The first point is not explicitly in there. We can look at that and try to, it's hard to sometimes accurately and concisely convey that, but yes.
Yeah, because I think that, and that came up in our in that lovely walk, it was understanding that the only option really left, I think people should make that choice, the option to have certainty of 6-foot distancing really is that 100% virtual option. You can't make the assumption otherwise, and that is important. I assume the queue is,
We're all done.
thank you. Item 1.04, correspondence. The board received correspondence from those names appearing here on the record. I want to thank everyone for their correspondence, for their input, and for their opinions. I want you to know that we do try to respond to everybody as soon as possible, when it is possible. Many of these people received the same email, and I want to thank them for their graciousness and understanding that as volunteers over the weekend, it's not always possible to respond to everybody. If I haven't responded to you, I apologize. Item 1.05 is a motion to approve the meeting minutes as attached.
Second.
Is there any discussion? All those in favor say yes?
Yes.
Yes. Opposed? Motion carries. We will now move to a strategic plan update. We do have a few action items this evening before we move into the planning agenda. Dr. Miller.
Thank you. We wrote this as a narrative, so we wouldn't need to spend much time tonight. This is really about the fall of '21, really important, but we think also not the right time to be talking about the fall when we're also focused, on the model right now. So again, critically important. It's summarized here in a narrative way, so I don't want to devalue it by not talking about it. I would just ask that everybody read it, both at home and on the board, and we're communicating this information to families as well.
This one is worth reading, folks, as well. So, Item 3.01 is a motion to approve the personnel supplementals and transportation items as attached.
Second?
Is there any discussion? All those in favor say yes.
Yes.
Yes. Opposed? Motion carries. Item 3.02 is a motion to approve the AIU policies, procedures, and use of funds for 21-22 as attached.
Second.
Is there any discussion? All those in favor say yes.
Yes.
Yes. Opposed? Motion carries. Item 3.03 is a motion to approve AIU transition MOU.
Second?
Is there any discussion? All those in favor say yes.
Yes.
Yes. Opposed? Motion carries. Item 3.04 is a motion to approve the principal practicum for Tracy Kuchnicki as attached.
Second.
Is there any discussion? All those in favor say yes.
Yes.
Yes. Opposed? Motion carries. We have 3 policy reads. The first is the third and final reading of batch 600 finance policies. Do I have a second?
I'll second.
Is there any discussion? All those in favor say yes.
Yes.
Yes. 3.06, third and final reading of batch 700 property policies.
Second?
Is there any discussion? All those in favor say yes.
Yes.
Yes. 3.07, our actual first reading of the much-discussed batch policy zeros, local board procedures.
Second.
Any discussion? All those in favor say yes.
Yes.
Yes. Mr. Kashani, Finance.
Yes, sir. Item 4.01, 02, 03, and 04 are just informational items. At the next meeting, at the regular meeting in March, we'll be talking about and asking for approval of those items. Financial reports, accounts payable, budget transfers, deputy real estate tax collector authorization, as well as solicitor. And then lastly, 4.05, a quick recap that we had a very informative and very constructive finance committee meeting. We talked about our upcoming budget 2021-22 and the challenges that lie therein with balancing it. We also talked about we went over the capital funding plan at a high level as well. Talked about Green Gym, how that's a big piece of the capital spend next year, and talked about Mr. DeTullio raised the issue of maybe putting it off, and we had a healthy conversation around pros and cons about that. And then lastly, we got a bond market update and discussed proceeding with the refunding of the 2016 series.
Thanks, Mark.
Yep.
That was a good finance committee, then. Right at the right level. Mr. DeTullio.
Item 5.01 is a motion to approve certified pool operating services at the next meeting. I have a discussion point on this, and if no one else does. Two things. Number one, on our content here, it says the cost for 2021 is going to be $15,200. In the proposal, it's $15,600. Just a small typo there. Also, just a question on this. These folks seem to do a good job for us, and Dana, I'm looking at you. I'm not sure if they deal with you or if it's if I'd have to talk to Jeff about this. But on contracts like this, can we do like a 3-year contract with like a regular CPI index increase every year, so it's not always coming back? It's just a thought.
We can. This is actually one of the agreements that Mr. Zimmerman has talked about moving back in-house at some point. They have had a variety of different plans. Some of those personnel have since left. And then I believe Mr. Gruber was supposed to be trained this year, but for this upcoming year. But with COVID, obviously that kind of fell to the wayside. In terms of the cost, though, I just want to go back. I think at the very top where it's talking about the 21-22 cost, that's the 15.6.
Oh, I'm sorry.
The 2021 cost is the current year. So it does reflect a $400 increase from the current year to next year.
That's my bad.
So we are hoping to, at some point in time, possibly pull this back in-house as that testing is required. The only difficulty is, though, in Allegheny County, you do have to have testing every day that the pool is in use, typically in a normal year. The swim team, PRA, oftentimes they're being used even on the weekends. So it would be best to actually have 2 personnel within the maintenance department certified to be able to do it. So it's on the list of things to do, but yes, we can do that.
And item 5.02 is at the regular meeting in March, a motion to approve the purchase and installation of new paging system and bell system from Horizon IS at Richland Elementary and Wexford Elementary. Total cost will be around $61,395. And I will move that those two be moved into a consent agenda unless anyone objects.
Sounds good. As we go through, if your subject area has items that you'd like moved to consent agenda, please note that so Ms. Williams can create one. By custom, we usually leave finance out, Mark, so. Dr. Meyer, academic achievement.
Item 6.01 is a 30-day display request for biology resources. This is an information item. Dr. Pasquinelli, do you want to add anything?
Yeah, just to keep everybody updated. So this is kind of coming to the end of the evaluation process. Hopefully everybody saw a couple times we put reminders out to the community last week that was the opportunity for community members, staff, additional staff members, and students to provide input on our final 2 resources that we've narrowed it down to different vendors. So this is for academic bio, and honors. We serve in those courses 300 to 400 students a year. It was a case where the online resources were no longer going to be available because of the date of our copyright of our current resource. So it was one of those, it was need versus want. This was a definite need. We'll have an executive summary for the board to read prior to next board meeting, and a request for our number 1 vendor to be on display for 30 days.
Thank you. Item 6.02 is also an information item. It's about basic math facts resources. And Dr. Justice?
Certainly so. While biology is at the end of the review process, we are once again revisiting our basic math facts because, as you recall, in May of 2020, both of the vendors we had just recently selected changed their models. One began charging parents to use an Abbott Home Splash Math, and the other, MobiMax, decided to only offer the full complement of all content areas and not allow us to get a single license for one content area as we were doing. So both of those vendors, this is our final year in those contracts, and so we had not originally looked at Freckle Math, which was one of the programs that had come up from the teachers survey that we initially conducted to say, what tools are you using that you would like us to look at? At that time, they were not owned by Renaissance, which they are now, which aligns with Star 360, the benchmarking tool that we utilize. They also now have a model where you can purchase a single subject, whereas previously it was the full complement of all of the subjects. So now it is cost effective. We are taking it through the same exact evaluation process and rubric that was designed by the math committee and the research. So we'll have an update for you forthcoming on how it shakes out and whether or not we want to look at that further and move forward with that tool or the other things that looked at previously. So more to come.
Thank you. Item 6.03 is state standardized testing for the school year of 2021. I don't know
We
if
can
that's
summarize that as well.
Yeah, we'll give you, I mean, everything's written there, but we'll give you a brief update.
Yeah, essentially, we did not test last year because of the pandemic. This year, it was a question as to whether the federal government would provide states an exemption, et cetera. After several iterations, PDE has recently submitted a proposal to the federal government to say we would like to use the more flexible option, which would allow us to utilize the testing dates that exist in the spring, if we wish, or to be able to push testing back to September of 21. So we're looking at that. The principals will be discussing that with us at this week's meeting. So initially our recommendation would be to stick with the original time schedule as opposed to delaying further, and we believe that we have ways to get at that. But we'll continue to share as that was just submitted, so it's not even fully approved yet by the U.S. Department of Education.
Yeah, I mean, obviously logistical challenges with a state assessment that has to be conducted in person. So, think about the hybrid and virtual model. That's a reality. Our Keystone exams, those are end-of-course exams. So we feel like, providing students the best opportunities for success at the conclusion of that course, that would lend itself to the end of the school year.
And we already know that the results will not be utilized for teacher evaluations whatsoever. They are not doing the value-added data based on what they anticipate being the participation rates.
And this is a topic that could change. So again, it's I think we're taking the prepare, organize, get ready, but it is also possible that something could change at the federal level when, again, as mentioned earlier, there are school systems that haven't been in school at all for 12 months. There's so many different things going on out there to try to implement a meaningful standardized assessment with results that can truly be about. It's just very difficult to do. So we'll see where this continues to go.
Have they thrown out any ideas of an online option?
We have online options that we can give here on a Chromebook on our network. So because of the test security and the need to keep that a standardized assessment, they don't allow testing to occur off school premises. So it has to happen here, whether it's electronic or paper-based, it's still here.
Still has to be here.
Yeah.
Okay.
And there are heightened levels of concern for some of our families to be in this environment, even in a very structured way. So again, that's something that we have to take into account.
I'm surprised. I know that the Bar Association finally, after a long time, they ended up, because it always had to be in person, very secure. They did an online version. You had to have your camera on, but it was an online option. So I'm surprised that wasn't. I'm just curious why they didn't do that. So.
The cost.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you, Colonel. Dr. Campbell.
Item 7.01 is an information item for board consideration at the regular March meeting. A motion to approve the UPMC Western Psychiatric Hospital Service Agreement as attached. And we also have one more item, item 7.02, an information item for board consideration at our regular March meeting. A motion to approve in accordance with our board policy 613, cooperative purchasing, the purchase of band uniforms for the Pine-Richland High School Marching Band, from Stanbury Uniforms at a total cost of $96,000 and some change, and banding together a cost of about $7,200 for a total of almost about $104,000. And we have the uniform here to show off the hat and the plume. So it's a new design. We've got about 14 years out of the old uniforms, and we expect to get 12 to 15 years out of that, so about $10,000 a year in cost. The full uniform is to my right. I would have modeled it, but they didn't supply my size.
You can put that on.
I'll put that
There
on.
you go.
I will model it to that one. So we will hope to have new marching band uniforms here shortly.
Is that the correct green?
Don't take it off yet.
Is that are we sure that's the PR green?
That is, listen, when you buy your uniforms, you make them last 14 years, you set the correct green.
Okay, all right, just want to be sure.
You're looking for a different.
Everyone else, that's the correct green.
Okay.
Thanks, Brad.
Just double checking, I'm just double checking.
Can I move that those be moved into a consent agenda? Would anyone object? Would you?
I'm fine with that.
Thanks, Greg.
I think we should keep the band separate and get Ben his size and make him wear it.
I think it's Dr. Justice's size. She was in the band with me too.
Would he have to perform like Yankee Doodle Dandy or something?
I think,
that would
yes.
be phenomenal.
Actually,
The alma mater. The alma mater.
I think I still remember the notes of the alma mater. I can break out the trombone, bring it next time.
Thank you, Dr. Campbell. Dr. Mihalik, personnel.
Thanks. Item 8.01, an information item for board consideration at the regular March meeting, a motion to approve personnel, which will be attached. And item 8.02 is also for our voting meeting later in March. It's a motion to approve in accordance with Policy 109, library resources, the weeding of library resources as attached, and I would recommend that this be put in the consent agenda.
Because we don't want to get bogged down in the weeds. That's
Gotta keep it light.
long,
We're
it's a long
laughing.
Monday, folks.
We're laughing
Long
inside
Monday.
here. We're cracking up.
The huge smiles
Yeah.
behind you. Thanks, Matt.
Thank you.
Mr. Moy.
Both of these are informational, 9.01 consent agenda, maybe? Kidding. This will be a motion to approve the health and safety plan that we just talked about. Too soon?
That one was funny.
And 9.02 will be about some natural gas. There we go.
Could we put 9.02?
What do you want to talk about? Sure.
No.
You know, I got
Ms. Seifert, do you think there'll be anything of interest there to discuss, or do you want to put that in consent?
Oh, no, I was joking.
Okay.
I was just going to say, I'm not sure how to answer that.
Can I mention something quickly about 901?
Yeah,
So
please,
early in the
please.
year, remember, in August, we had
We're going off.
a real format for the health and safety plan. You know, it feels like 100 years since August. So the actual format of health and safety plan is not so critical as the key elements of the plan. So we will update it, but instead of trying to take where we are and force fit it into an old model, we'll just make sure that it is clear what it is we're recommending.
I think that makes sense. Item 10.01 is just an information item under board business. The board held a workshop virtually on Monday, February 15th. We talked about updated regulations, held a safety update, and we discussed the transformation in education. That item was summarized, about more than summarized, really talked about in some detail. I think it's worth going back and looking at transforming the future. So not something we want to get bogged down in right now, but if you have a deeper interest, know that we do think and plan about what a post-COVID primary and secondary educational institution looks like, what it can look like, and what we can do to make it and shape it to be a better place to meet all of our learners. We do think and work on that, and I really appreciate for all the time everyone gives from the administration and the board, your participation in that exercise.
So can I say, I heard a great phrase today. So instead of saying return to normal, we're going to return to better. I just thought that was really, I really like that.
Item 11.01, reports. Any reports from board members, items they'd like to share?
Yeah, we didn't have a Beatty board meeting in February. And Prof, there's not an update. I gave the report last meeting.
Thank you. Administration, Dr. Miller.
Vaccination. So you might have heard in the popular media today some conversation around the Johnson & Johnson vaccine and the possibility that an announcement would come out in Pennsylvania relative to either prioritizing educators in some way or shifting educators into 1A, phase 1A. Again, too preliminary to know. The AIU had been working to coordinate a healthcare liaison with all districts in Allegheny County so that we would work with a point person. Again, we don't have definitive details, but certainly we hope that something promising could come out of that vaccine, and then the opportunity could be available to staff.
Just a couple things I'd like to share. Today we put out a communication, for our high school families, again specifically for our seniors. We asked them again, remember to save the dates. We've committed to an in-person graduation. We have that date is June 11th. We want to keep the window for rain dates around the 11th because we know it's going to have to be an outside ceremony. So we've asked families just to consider that as they make their plans for June. We also sent out a communication about some type of senior celebration that was clear from the feedback we received from our students. Our seniors want some opportunity to be together. We told them we have to figure that out, but we're committing to that. So we're looking at some venues for them to be together. They want some type of formal/semi-formal, and we want to make that happen. So we sent out some information about that. Annually, we do a mini-thon similar to what Penn State does for their thon to raise money for cancer, and we're moving forward with that. Again, we think we can push that back a little bit further into the spring. That allows us to take our students outside, spread them out, and do some fun activities by grade level. So again, some time to get the students together safely and celebrate and for a great cause. And then our PTO really has been doing a nice job working with us at the high school. They've been partnering with the administration and the teachers and the sponsors. We're going to do some photos of kids and seniors and selfies and just some fun things that they're still working on to again, get the kids talking and engaging and celebrating all that they've done over their time at Pine-Richland. So looking forward to that, but that's out for everyone to take a look at that, and we'll continue to send updates as we get more information.
Thank you. Any other reports? Ms. Williams, do we have any other visitors?
Just check one more time. We did not. We do not.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone. Thank you, administration, board members, for your engagement, and community for your understanding. Have a good evening.